The classical hoplite has to be one of the most famous and recognisable images in all of military history. Today we're going to take a look at a panoply representing around the time of the Peloponnesian Wars to see how a hoplite from the classical period was armed. Hello, my name is Adam. I'm an ancient Greek reenactor and experimental archaeologist. I work a lot with recreating and reconstructing ancient armours, battle styles and formations, and practically testing them with our group. And today we're going to take a look at one of my panoplies that dates to around the time of the Peloponnesian Wars. So this would have been a hoplite of decently aristocratic status, not the peak of the social hierarchy, but a pretty well armoured hoplite for the time of the Peloponnesian Wars. I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of just what I'm wearing right now. I'm wearing essentially the t-shirt of this period, the incredibly baggy Ionic chiton. This one is made of linen. Likely people have seen lots of linen chitons, but also some wool ones as well. This is an incredibly full garment, very different to the more favoured Doric style chiton in the Archaic period. On my head I am then wearing a petassos, which is sort of your generic sort of sun hat. In this period there are no professional soldiers, they are all essentially citizen militia forces. Depending on your polis, roughly anyone from the age of 18 to 60 male citizens were eligible for military service. They would have been your farmers, your sculptors, your potters, your blacksmiths. Anyone in the position to really afford any form of panoply would be serving as hoplites. Anyone who was sort of under that social bracket of middle to aristocratic would likely be fighting as peltas or siloi, rock throwers, javelin men, slingers, that type of stuff. And I think it's particularly important to note that in the time period of the Peloponnesian Wars, we would have seen mass conscription of men from all brackets of the social hierarchy and basically forcefully sending them out to fight. Whereas in the Archaic period, we're looking, more at landowners fighting landowners, sort of, 3 days rations, you march one day, fight one day, come back the next. We're seeing large military campaigns in this period. We're seeing mass conscripts of men, even slaves being conscripted up to fight. So I think it's just very important to outline that perhaps most, if not quite a lot of your hoplites would essentially be wearing this with a shield and a spear and maybe a helmet. It's highly likely that lots of even helots in Sparta are being basically conscripted by the Lacedaemonian government and being sent out to war. So we would have seen likely a lot of people very minimally armoured in this period. This isn't the highest amount of armour that you would see. Basically subsidise your tube and yoke for a bronze thorax. So this is, a decently well-off guy. Now the first piece of armour that you'd put on are your greaves or kinemides. These in this period are basically all anatomically shaped greaves. They are shaped and sculpted into the sort of idealised and stylised musculature of the human leg. And these are a self-clamping greave, which is by far the most common in this period, essentially a springiness that sticks it to your leg. It's very, very important that these are fitted to you. Calves, especially, some of the most difficult and notoriously hard armours to make for armourers because there are so many subtle shapes and everyone's leg happens to be different. So it's very, very important that these are fitted to you for them to work properly. And you will also notice that I'm wearing on my feet some felted socks. There is quite a large shoe debate, which perhaps I'll do a dedicated video on. Simply put, for our modern feet that aren't conditioned for marching possibly barefoot all the time, shoes and socks are a welcome addition to our panoplies. We have evidence for socks in this period, we have evidence for shoes in this period, and I think it's highly likely that someone of the hoplite class, especially in a battlefield context, will be wearing something on their feet. These quite simply just slide on and clamp. There's really nothing awkward or difficult about it. They will stay on like that really quite comfortably, and then you just do the same for the other one. Next, I'm now going to don my sandals, but then after that we go to the tube and yoke. Unlike in the Archaic period, which if you haven't watched already, I'd highly recommend you to check out my arming an Archaic hoplite video. That is my main panoply, my main impression. And that covers basically a hoplite who is fully equipped, so including anatomical foot armour, thigh armour, bronze cuirass, which we see these pieces of armour completely faded out within this period. So we basically, fully armoured hoplite, you're talking greaves, cuirass and helmet. You don't see armour or foot armour or thigh armour in the classical period, especially not the time of the Peloponnesian War, which again, as I said, likely most people wouldn't be particularly well armoured when you're basically flushing out these mass campaigns in this essentially World War state of Greece at this time period. Now that I've got my legs completely done from armour and footwear, we're now going to sort of the most famous and also controversial piece of this impression, that being the tube and yoke or the linothorax style armour. If you want a more in-depth overview of this armour, then please check out my Evolution of Ancient Greek Armour video that I did very recently. I'll leave a link in the description to that. That goes more in depth on this style of armour. In short, we don't know how they were made. We have a few leading theories. We have literary mentions that many of these were likely made of leather and linen. Linothorax is basically a modern term associated with this armor, but Homer uses the term linothorax, which just means corset of linen, in the Iliad. That's sort of the name that we associate with this armor. We have many different construction theories. We have very few surviving artifacts, basically the main one being Philippa Macedon's, which is actually iron, likely coated in a textile. But fundamentally, this is a tube and yoke style armor, that meaning that it has the tube, your torso, and the yoke, the shoulders. And this was essentially a blueprint that many different types of armors would have been fitted to. And I mean, we even see tube and yoke style armors in use well into the Hellenistic, the Roman age. The Lorica Hamata is fundamentally a tube and yoke armor. And even today, many modern Kevlar vests follow the same schematic of a tube and yoke with shoulders. I categorize these, and I think we should categorize these as tube and yoke armors, not as linothorax or spolas. And you would have likely seen various different construction methods. If you're perhaps very, very wealthy, you would have it adorned in scales. If you were poorer, you couldn't afford that. So it's very much on a spectrum of construction methods and likely correlation with wealth, fashion, and just desired appeal anyways. With that out of the way, again, if you want more details on that, check out that other video that I've linked in the description. This armor is quite helpful because you can quite easily put it on by yourself, whereas your bronze thorax, you really need a hand. So the best way I find to put this armor on is leave one shoulder done up. You then wrap the tube around you, you move the yoke back, you put your arm through. I like to pull out my sleeve. We often see in artwork sort of sleeves still hanging out of the armor. This side then wraps around and is tied to the front, and then you then do up the yoke over the top. And it's important that this armor here is done up tight. You really want the weight of the armor hanging on your natural waist. It basically shouldn't be at all hanging on your shoulder. It's the bottom done up and then the top. Then the shoulder is just tied around the center pin, and there you go, you have your tube and yoke on. This armor basically follows the same schematic as every other armor in this period and basically throughout history. It ends at your natural waist. It shouldn't be extending down to your hip and groin, and the teragaes, the feathers, are often believed to be protectors for the thighs. They end at just the end of the groin. So these are really lower belly and upper thigh protectors to allow for very good mobility. But this armor, as all armor should, ends at your natural waist around your belly button, and it hugs your waist tightly. My shoulders aren't really taking any of the weight of this armor, which allows me to wear it and carry it around my center of mass, which means that I tire far less easily. Next, we sort of go to the star of the show, at least in my opinion, that being the helmet. This is not a Corinthian helmet in this period. This is a Chalcidian helmet. The Corinthian helmet had essentially completely faded out of use in this period. This helmet is currently housed in the British Museum, the one that's based on, and dated around 450 BC. So it's highly likely that this helmet saw use in the Peloponnesian Wars. I believe it's an Attic find. This is of the Chalcidian type, which is sort of an evolutionary step in the Corinthian helmet. You can see this one is practically the same, except it has rounded and far more open cheek plates. This one is highly, highly embossed, but you also see Chalcidian helmets with hinged cheek plates that allow you to open and close the cheeks. Otherwise, other helmets in this period that became incredibly popular are the Pelos helmet, the sort of bronze conical hat. You would have seen probably Illyrian helmets, Attic helmets, a very, very large variety of helmets in this period. But the Corinthian helmet is back in the Archaic period. That helmet really seems to fade out of use basically at the turn of the Classical. Around 500 BC is sort of the last hurrah of the Corinthian helmet. We don't really see them past 480, 470. Now, you pad these out, not much. A helmet should ideally fit you very, very closely, especially in Hellenic context. Armour is supposed to be relatively light and very, very close fitting, worn like a second skin. I wear a felted Pelos hat. This seems to probably be the most common. This is actually where the Pelos helmet evolves from, is it's a hat that is turned into bronze form, which we see quite a lot. We have, otherwise, Aristotle tells us of sea sponge that can be used to pad helmets. We also have, in an Etruscan context, finds of grass-woven caps, so highly likely that those were also used in mainland Greece as well. Now, you pad helmets out for a multitude of reasons. Comfort is a big one. You don't want, skin on bronze, direct contact on your head. It also to absorb blows. Again, you don't need much, but just a little bit to absorb blows can go a long, long way. But all throughout history, you see helmets padded. They really should be padded to be properly functional. So I've got my helmet on. I'm pretty well armoured, right? Even without my shield, this is still more armoured than most of history. I'm pretty much entirely protected, especially when you factor in that shield. I should have really gone to my sidearm before my helmet, as it makes it a little bit easier to put on. This is a Xiphos, or Xyphos, as a little bit more of an accurate pronunciation. In this period, we see sort of the evolution towards incredibly short styles of swords. So Greek swords are already typically short by medieval standards, but they're about that long. Other Xiphos style swords, other Xiphoi. We start to see around the 4th century, around the Peloponnesian Wars and into the 300s, the stylistic shift, particularly in Sparta and Thebes, it seems to be, to an incredibly short sword, basically the size of a kitchen knife. In the Archaic period, we typically see slightly longer swords. Now, there are a few reasons that we see shorter swords. One of them is that we are using iron to create our weapons, from spearheads to sword blades. Classical and Archaic Greece are not the Bronze Age. There's a very, very common misconception. The Bronze Age, if you want to label things as ages, ends around 1200 BC. We are the Iron Age, and bronze is the predominant use for armour well into the Iron Age. Lots of the ironworking technologies aren't really advanced enough to make incredibly long swords until we actually get into sort of the medieval period, is when we start to actually see very long iron and steel weapons. But also, in the style of combat that we are talking about in this period, a shorter sword is far more satisfactory. It is far more effective for how you're going to be using it. You go from a long spear to, if you happen to close those ranks, if you get in very personal, a sword such as this is far better at maneuvering around the people that are basically shoulder to shoulder with you, getting through eye holes in helmets, getting around gaps. This is far more advantageous than a long sword that's going to get in your way. You're not going to be able to move it around. And these would have been, you can imagine, quite ruthless. This is a hacking and sort of slashing multi-tool of a weapon. Something else that we see in this period is that the sword is strung relatively high on the torso, around rib height. This is again for a multitude of reasons. It's a short sword, which means I don't have to have the aerial space to maneuver it as I did with a longer sword, like a long sword. It being very small allows it to sit basically uninterrupted, right? It doesn't interfere with me when I move, when it's strung very, very high on the chest. It's also incredibly easy for me to access. If I'm in a tight formation, if I'm in a press, not just face to face with my enemy, but with my allies either side of me, it's far easier for me to grab a sword positioned up that high, especially when I'm holding a shield, than it is if my sword is strung down here. This is far more advantageous, again, for that style of warfare and the style of sword that is in use in this period. If I'm in a tight press, I can access that incredibly quickly. And again, it basically hangs, uninterrupted. It doesn't interfere with my basic movements. Next is probably the most important and vital piece of equipment for the hoplite, that being the aspis. This is sort of fundamentally what made the hoplite the hoplite. It was what gave birth to this style of warfare. This is not the hoplon. There is a big misconception that the hoplite derives from hoplon. That is not correct. I have a dedicated video with Professor Paul Bardonius on that topic if you're interested in that. In short, hoplon appears several hundred years after the term of hoplite and aspis are used. Hopler essentially is where hoplite derives from, which can mean equipment, armament. It essentially means equipped man is what hoplite stands for. The hopler can mean the rigging on a ship, it can be the claws of an animal, it can be armament, it can be a variety of things. So your shield is hopler in the sense that shield is equipment, but we don't typically see hoplon being used specifically for the aspis. It's essentially just means shield. So your aspis is a hoplon the same way that your aspis is a shield, but the specific name for the shield seems to be either the Argive shield or the aspis. It is not where the hoplite gets its name from. And this is a very bold shield. It's quite large, it's relatively light. Historically, you're looking at around 12 to 15 pounds, or maybe 6 or 7 kilograms, if my math's correct there. It's relatively light. I think most people think that it's a lot heavier than it truly is. And you can again see how that sword can quite comfortably sit there. We even in artistic records sometimes see guys actually holding the sword in their offhand. This is fundamentally what allows me to fight as a hoplite. This is the most important piece of the panoply. And you can see how incredibly protected I am when I include that shield in that panoply. But to be a hoplite, you're not really complete without your bread and butter, that being your doru, your spear. The spear and shield were really what made the hoplite. The hoplite, your heavy infantry of the ancient Greek world. The dory is a very, very unique weapon in the sense that it is double-ended. There is an iron acme at the front and a bronze soriter on the back end. There is a distal taper going across and down the spear, which allows me to hold it as a counterweight, as well as the addition of the bronze soriter. And it allows me, very helpfully, to stick it in the ground and it will stand up. For those of you that have questions regarding overhand spear usage, I have also just done sort of an official response video on overhand spear usage in a hoplite context. I'd highly recommend that you guys check that out if you want to sort of get a little bit of insight into the hoplite way of war, how we think hoplites likely fought. So there we have it. This is your sort of Peloponnesian War classical era hoplite, fully armed and equipped. I hope that you enjoyed this video and learned something as well. If you'd like to support the channel, then please consider checking out our channel memberships. Special thanks to our channel members who continue to support the channel. It truly does mean a lot. If you don't want to do this or you can't afford to do that, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all. If you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing and even sharing the video to people who might find this interesting, as our audience is really quite few and far between, that would be greatly appreciated. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please consider checking out the archaic hoplite video, the first video in this series of arming hoplites, as I think if you enjoyed this one, you would enjoy that one. And personally, the archaic period is by far my favourite in terms of hoplite warfare and hoplite armament. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section. I'll try my best to answer them to the best of my abilities. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll hopefully catch you in the next one.